Morning, everybody. A few familiar faces. Nice to meet you all again. And for those who don't know me, Mark Heath of the GLAA. I'm slowly getting used to adding the extra A because for 12 years I've been working for the GLA and joined the GLA when it was a blank piece of paper in 2005. Seeing the growth and evolution of the authority which regulates the supply of labour into agriculture, shellfish, gathering, food production, processing, etc. And that licensing regime continues as we've moved on into the GLAA. But one of the questions that was always asked of us as an authority from the very, very early days, why don't you license construction? There's been a perception, I think, that construction has a real issue in the provision and use of labour, whether that's permanent staff, agency staff, temporary staff, subcontracted staff. Whether that is accurate, whether that's a reflection of problems that are within the construction sector, and that is as wide as you know it is in terms of what construction actually means. But clearly there's been a perception that construction has an issue with potentially exploited workers. As the GLA moved forward to become the GLAA, it was clear that organised criminality, serious exploitation, what is now termed as modern slavery, was endemic within certain elements of different sectors, whether it's agriculture, construction, care, hospitality, logistics, where businesses, legitimate businesses, are at serious risk of infiltration, exploitation, and a vehicle for the criminal enterprise to thrive and to flourish. So what I'll talk about are one or two things around some of the experience that we've had, and also why we feel the construction protocol is simply a logical step for us as a law enforcement body, regulator in certain sectors, to engage with a sector that is understood by many to have problems of labour exploitation. A few myths and a few realities. I do an awful lot of presentations, both in the UK and abroad, but certainly within the UK there's a perception from many that this doesn't happen in the UK. Nothing could be further from the truth. The perception that labour exploitation stops in Southeast Asia is simply wrong. Workers in the UK are exploited systematically through legitimate businesses, through agency labour, through labour supply chains, and you will not have to go too far from here. I would say that if you moved a mile from here in any direction, you would find a worker that's being paid nothing for a 60 to 80 hour week. Simply wherever you like to look. Another misconception is it happens only in the shadow economy. So people say to us, well, it must be nail bars and car washes. It must be the periphery of different businesses. Again, as I'll explain to you a little bit later on, legitimate business is a very simple, easy target for what is a simple and easy business model for the exploiter. Coming back to the point I started with, construction has a greater problem than anybody else. I simply don't know if that's true or not, and I don't think anybody can hand on heart say that they will know whether construction is worse than any other. A personal view, I don't think it is. I think it's one of a number of sectors that is at risk of that infiltration and that criminality, and they, that is the perpetrators, the exploiters, will have an avenue into your sector in the same way as they have an avenue into other sectors. And lastly, a myth is that these people are kept under lock and key. Those that are exploited are treated in the same way as you would perceive slaves to be treated 2,000 years ago, where they're kept under lock and key and only allowed out to go to work. You can actually coerce, force, and keep a worker in a position of slavery when they're in a house with an open door, but that worker will simply have no idea where they can go, who they can seek help from, and more importantly, where their friend will be that can help them get out of the situation they're in. And the one thing I'd like to stress is that everybody in this room, in whichever role you've got, can affect a change which will allow you or your business to be the eyes and ears for somebody that's actually being exploited. Because what decisions you make within business at the top end and through management can have a direct impact upon the resource that is most valuable to any project that you're undertaking, and that's your worker. So you have a role to play, and we all have a role to play together. So coming to some of the reality, it will be in your supply chains, whether in the UK or elsewhere. It will be in the projects that you're working on. It does introduce criminality to your business. And you will know that criminals are the same as any other business enterprise. They will seek to diversify. So you have criminal infiltration into your business in terms of exploited labour, what other avenues will they pursue? Is it theft from site? Is it fraud? Is it deception? Is it health and safety risk that they bring to the site as well? So don't think simply in terms of exploited workers being the sole reason for criminals wanting to get into your business. But there's a vast amount of money to be made. Cases we've dealt with as the GLA, now GLAA, even small operations for the exploitation of a small number of workers, 12 to 18 workers, can attract significant amounts of money. We're talking millions, not just thousands. So again, these people are doing it for profit, no more, no less. So what do we do? Well, we simply work in partnership to protect vulnerable and exploited workers. We recognise as a small law enforcement agency within the Home Office family that we cannot tackle this issue alone. We have elements of legislation that are available to us, recently given to us as well through the Immigration Act, allowing us to investigate modern slavery offences under the Modern Slavery Act, which you'll all be familiar with, tied us into the transparency requirements. So therefore, we now have more tools to do our job than we had until the 30th of April. We now have a responsibility for policing, in its loosest term, the supply of labour to the whole labour market within the UK. So although the licensing regime continues and will continue in agriculture, it's not been extended into any other sector, but we now have the reach to look at labour exploitation and modern slavery into all business strands. So what does labour market exploitation look like? There are 4 categories that we've determined that will best illustrate and best demonstrate the types of activity that you might have within your supply chains. Certainly, you will always find a chancer, whatever business that you're in. I've had 25 years in law enforcement in various guises. There will always be somebody that spots an opportunity. It might be a low-level criminality. It might be a low-level deception. But somebody will spot an opportunity to perhaps not pay workers holiday pay or withhold some wages for whatever reason they might see fit. They just see an opportunity. Some employers in some sectors build an employment model around the exploitation of workers, where family members, wider extended family, acquaintances, and I use the term loosely, friends, are recruited to further a business interest when they are subject to low pay or little pay. And that is a business model in certain sectors of business that seems to be tried and tested and trusted, where workers are disadvantaged. The one that causes the GLAA most concern is the one that's referred to as horse trader, the intermediary. And very simply, how that works, and I'll give you an example of cases that I dealt with when I was an operational manager in the West Midlands. Workers recruited from Poland, coming to the UK for a better life. Once they get on the coach to leave Poland to come to the West Midlands, they're told, you don't have to pay me for the transport, you can pay me back when we get you work in the UK. They get on the bus, come to Birmingham, they have one debt and an obligation to that person, in their mind, that brought them over. Brought into the UK, same happens with the accommodation. We'll take you somewhere to live, you can pay me back when you've got work. 2 debts. That person is in the UK, doesn't know where they're living, might be living with people that don't speak the same language, and certainly will be living in an area environment that is not familiar to them. During that process, they'll be told, if you give me your passport or identity card, I can go and get you registered for work. So within a space of 24 hours, that person's across here, no language skills, no employment, completely reliant upon somebody that person's now got 2 debts with, and also they've got the passport. Those workers are then directed, taken to, or pushed into legitimate recruitment agencies to register for work. Now, if you're an Eastern European worker in that environment, there's nothing in law that prevents you working in the UK. You'll present an address that checks out. You'll present evidence of your identity. You have the right to work in the UK. In all probability, you will then be placed into employment. The rub is that the details that are given to the employer or the agency are controlled by the person that's brought them across. So the bank account and the wages go to the exploiter, the worker goes to work, and they are trapped in debt, no source of income, no wages, completely reliant upon the exploiter. And legitimate businesses are targeted in that way systematically. The reason they are called horse traders is that the exploiters refer to the workers as horses. I can honestly say I can go to Birmingham, to an address in Birmingham, and buy you a worker for £250. That has happened in cases that I've managed, cases I've dealt with, cases I've investigated. Workers are very simply the lowest commodity within your labour supply chains, and there will be somebody only too willing to exploit that individual. In addition to that, and lastly, you've got the organised criminal above all this. They may control horse traders, they may not. But organised criminality only seeks to diversify in the same way as your business will seek to diversify. Where can they maximise profit for the lowest risk? Organised criminality have recognised that labour exploitation is a serious and significant way of earning money. We handle all of our intelligence in the GLAA in the same way as the police do. It's graded, assessed and evaluated. It's secure, data protection principles apply, and we can only share it lawfully with law enforcement partners when there is a specific need to do so. We know that the top end of criminality, which comes into a box in a matrix 1A, there are people in the UK national profile in a category of 1A that have labour supply as part of their business model. So if the big boys are doing it, all the smaller ones are going to be seeking to replicate that. And then if you turn that on its head, looking for leaders and people who can make a difference, if the criminals are seeking to make money out of this business model, as leaders in business, why can't we then collectively tackle this and learn from each other? Because that's what the criminals are doing. It makes no sense for us to do anything differently. So where are your risks? Can we all honestly say we know where our goods and services come from? Society has been exceptional at checking the supply chains for the product in terms of ethical sourcing of product, the way that the farms work in countries far and wide. We've been really poor at asking the same questions about labour. Do we know where our labour comes from? Do we know what checks and balances are put in place? Do we honestly care where the workers come from? Do we question where the food on the plate comes from, how the house is built, how the construction site actually operates, where your clothes come from, etc.? I don't think we ask those questions. So we do need to change that culture where we are more inquisitive about the labour supply chain. Don't just accept that it's being sorted out by somebody else. It is your responsibility, because you'll be paying the money over. You'll be controlling the contract. Your procurement team will be regularly paying for supply of labour. Do we honestly know where that money's going? I suggest not. What checks have you got in place? Are you got assurance where the workers are coming from? Ask some questions. The number of businesses I've spoken to in the GLA, certainly in the early years, when you said to a labour user, where have your workers come from? What do you do to check those workers are being treated properly? An answer came back from one, I daren't ask any questions, because if I ask any questions, the workers won't be here tomorrow. And that business was paying over £1 million a year for its labour. And it daren't ask any questions for fear of workers not turning up. Now that seems to be the wrong way around. But that is the culture in agriculture at the time. What we can't afford to do is for us all to turn the other way and say it's somebody else's problem. Because if you're paying the money, let's see where it goes. Criminal groups will infiltrate your business. Thefts from sites, for example, may be just a further perk of the job for them. So again, don't just think too closely around what it might be. And lastly, just want to think about that we've experienced in our work to date. If you've got a contract that has a financial penalty on it, and you've got the choice as a business between meeting that contract, receiving your bonus, and not having a financial penalty, or, at the last minute, recruiting workers with no questions asked to fulfil that contract, where do you go? Now, I won't put anybody in the spot in this room, but I've asked the question privately in a number of businesses I've been to, and the honest answer is usually, I need to get the contract. I need to fulfil that, I don't want a financial penalty. But through that process, who's recruiting the workers? If you need 20 workers to finish a particular project on a given day, and somebody says, I've got 20 workers for you, no questions asked, the temptation will be there for you to take that. So again, just to think around different things you can do as a business, have you got contractual arrangements through the best of intentions that allows somebody to exploit it. That's the experience that we've got in the GLA sector to date. That is something that we need to address. So where are the risks? These will be familiar to you. I won't run through each bullet point, but there are risks within labour supply chains. If somebody's got low skill, low expectation, high turnover, high demand, work that has generally been left to others to do, you will have an issue. Subcontracting is a really big issue in the sector that we regulate. We've experienced the longer the supply chain, the longer the subcontracting chains, the greater risk of labour exploitation. Because those chains can only be policed so far, I would suggest. Resources are always going to be an issue. So the longer the supply chain, the more subcontracting, we feel the greater the risk, whether that's formal or informal. Auditing, how robust is an auditing programme? Again, are we really asking the right questions? Are we looking under the surface to what happens in reality, rather than just looking at what processes and checks are in place? What does it actually mean for the worker? Coming back to that point, there is always somebody exploited. In labour exploitation, there's always a customer and end user, there's always somebody being exploited. Does auditing actually ask the right questions to get to that level? Don't think you're immune from this if you're a legitimate business. High street labour recruitment agencies, certainly some that the GLA's worked with over the years, know full well they've been infiltrated. One member of the GLAA board, who was a CEO for one of those companies, said quite openly in one of our conferences, audits don't catch criminals. He accepted and he knew criminals had infiltrated his business. He was simply a vehicle for them to make money. You will be the same, I have no doubt. I don't get political about anything at all. I'm not that sort of animal. But you've got to mention Brexit. And I simply mention this because of things that we are told from people that we deal with. There is a growing shortage of workers in the agricultural sector. I understand that elements of the construction sector are also starting to see a slowdown in the number of workers that are coming from Eastern Europe. The one thing that you can be sure about is, firstly, the workers will come from somewhere. And if the demand increases, and the barriers are in place, there will be somebody who will spot the opportunity to exploit the worker. Again, Brexit is an opportunity for business, but also an opportunity for the exploiter. We need to be alive to that. Labour supply will be a real issue, I think, in a number of sectors. We see from our conversations that that's starting to have an impact. Where that will lead, we simply don't know. One thing that I will say, and we'll lead on to the protocol very shortly, is that there's a real intelligence gap about the issues that affect construction. We as a regulator were forced upon the agricultural sector by legislation and licensing. We accept that. We had to learn about that sector very quickly. We have the ability to learn a little bit more slow time what construction actually means, what it looks like, where the difficulties and the risks are. The protocol, the conversation, the dialogue, openly and transparently with anybody in the room and any business, is simply to identify where the risks are, where the intelligence is, and allows us to do something about it collectively. One of the emerging trends we've found out about very recently is limited information in construction, as I say. Advert in a paper, contact name and phone number, work on a building site. Very simple. We've all seen them in the small ads, whether you're looking for a garden shed or whatever it might be. They're all there. The exploiter has the phone, might be a false name, has the contact in the site, 10 workers turn up on the site. Everybody's happy. Site's happy, exploiter's happy. The wages go to the exploiter. The workers are told for 2 or 3 weeks, don't worry, I'll sort your wages out when I get the paperwork sorted out. Then all of a sudden, that exploiter disappears. The phone is bought with a SIM-only phone, can be thrown away, name's false, that person's disappeared. So for 3 or 4 weeks, and we understand it is probably a 3 or 4 week period, that worker's worked on a site in the expectation of being paid, no pay's forthcoming. You as a business, not pointing at anybody here, but the business has benefited from that labour. You've paid money over in good faith, the worker hasn't got it. The same happens with agency labour in our experience, where if you check the paperwork, nothing at all is out of place. Because the bank account, the details about the worker, the address, as I say, is all legitimate and in the UK. But what you don't know is that work is being done for no pay because the exploiter has the bank account. You are benefiting from that. You might be paying the going rate. The worker isn't. So simple. So leads me on to the protocol. We launched it, as Shamir said at the conference last week. For us, it's just an open invitation from the GLAA for the construction sector to sit around the table with us to learn about each other's difficulties, issues, and collectively sort out what we can do to tackle modern slavery effectively and efficiently. We can't be everywhere as a regulator. People within business are on the ground. They have the contacts to be able to identify this issue. We treat information in the way I said earlier on. It is all dealt with confidentially and under the protocols you would expect for any law enforcement agency. We just want it to be open and constructive. We're not here to create a burden for anybody. It is a genuine and open invitation to speak to us, to engage in our learning process as to where the issues are in construction, but equally for construction to help shape what we can collectively do to tackle those issues. We are pushing forward with this. Signatories from last week, there are more people that are coming forward to sign up to it. All we ask for is if we have authority from you to use your brand in the marketing, in the very loosest term of this protocol, we expect you, through that acknowledgement and use of your brand, to say that you will work with the GLA to be supportive of that open dialogue, sharing of information. Criminals will only thrive if we don't talk about this subject. No criminal, I can assure you, wants to talk about their criminal activity. And if you as a business take some interest in what they're doing, they will then be deterred and disrupted in some way, shape or form, no matter how minimal. So coming back to it again, if we lead and show an example, we have an open dialogue and show quite rightly law enforcement and the private sector, and in this particular case construction, is ahead of the game, we actually start to make some significant difference to people on the ground. We're going to set meetings from January. Shamir and I are working on dates for next year. If anybody wants to talk about the protocol and what it means in any great depth above what I've said, please do so. I'm here till the coffee break this afternoon, but any time than that. It really is an open invitation. We want to have that dialogue with you, understand your issues, and allow us to share information in the way that it should be shared, constructively. We're not going to give the crown jewels of intelligence away. We are not going to name and shame businesses. We are not going to say, this happens to John Smith Limited, why aren't you doing it? It really is to learn from each other about the best way forward. My contact details readily available. Sound like a double glazing salesman here, but we are here to help. As a regulator, we have learned some very painful lessons with the agricultural sector. We are here to share those with you to the benefit of your business. The retailers, and Cindy will touch on this a little bit later on, no doubt, the retailers have got this space, ETI have got this space, where there is an open dialogue. We just need to make sure that we're all using the similar framework. But again, contact me, happy to speak in the margins or at any other time, and thank you for your time.